Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here to talk about one of my favorite subjects and research subjects that I've been looking at for over the past 5 or 6 years. Here are my disclosures. So taper corrosion has been an issue in the past, but after metal-on-metal hip replacement, it reemerged as a clinically relevant problem and has since spread to being a concern also with metal-on-polyethylene implants. The adverse local tissue reactions, whether it's from metal-on-polyethylene or metal-on-metal, the reaction to the trunnion debris is very similar, with a aggressive, potentially in some patients, loss of abductors, and that being very difficult to treat long-term. Now, since the subject is not new, the mechanism, what was thought at least to be the primary mechanism, is known as mechanically assisted crevice corrosion, and it is a complicated and multifactorial problem. In my talk, in this talk, I'll be focusing primarily on what new emerging theories are coming out in the literature as kind of the sources that address this problem, and then hopefully start talking about some solutions that have appeared and are addressing this issue. So what have we learned about what causes or what tends to promote fretting corrosion in total hips? From the literature of the last 10 years, it's pretty clear that this mechanism progresses over time, that trunnions that have a more flexible cone, whether it's smaller in geometry or whether it is made of a more flexible alloy like titanium, those tend to promote taper corrosion or be associated more with taper corrosion. The amount of offset you have, and also in the literature there is some evidence, especially with metal-on-metal hips, that a large head size can be associated with fretting corrosion. But why is this happening now with metal-on-polyethylene? Now, there have been a lot of discussion as to potential theories. Josh Jacobs, in his 2016 review, outlined several of them. I want to kind of highlight for you guys some of the theories as to why this is becoming more of an issue today than it was in the past. So, surgical technique. We've heard already today about some new techniques that have evolved over the last 10 years. Minimally invasive techniques, direct anterior. Some of these techniques do not necessarily allow as much visualization as before and can complicate with giving you with contamination on the taper. It's essential for these tapers to be installed clean and dry. If they're not, if they're contaminated with either fat or with saline solution, you could have not secure engagement of the taper, which could lead to increased fretting and also lead to more corrosion. So that's one potential factor. Another potential factor that's been highlighted in the literature has been the flexibility of stem design. So in the 1980s, 1990s, stems tended to be made out of cobalt chrome and also tended to be physically larger, like have a larger geometry, like so-called 1416 trunnions. Over time, with interest in minimizing dislocation and impingement, these trunnions have been made smaller and also been made out of titanium. And combining those, you end up with a more flexible trunnion in modern designs than was available in the 1980s. And that's been associated as another reason for why we're seeing increased prevalence of corrosion today. Now, there's also been questions raised about manufacturing of these implants. And manufacturers, if you ask them, will swear in a stack of religious works that they have not changed the manufacture of these implants. And yet there are studies appearing in the literature that there have been random issues potentially associated with manufacturing. So in this paper by Hussey and McGrory, they report in a series of almost 1,400 stems, and they found that when they looked at the incidence of adverse tissue reactions or taper corrosion, implants that were implanted in 2009 for whatever reason were associated with significantly higher rates of adverse local tissue reaction. They were lower before, they were lower after, but there was something about this 2009 being a weird year for them. There have also been recalls by one manufacturer for certain batches of trunnions. And we now have also literature appearing that even though there are international standards for the cobalt chromium that is used in femoral heads, there may be some microstructures that are just potentially more susceptible to leading to in vivo corrosion in the taper. We didn't know any of this beforehand. Now, another thing which we're also starting to learn is appreciate is our potential patient factors. And this was revealed a little bit more illustrated in some of our retrieval studies where we looked at comparing autopsy versus revision retrievals. When we got retrievals that had been assembled before they were disassembled in the operating room, so they came to us assembled and we disarticulated them, we found that the tapers that were retrieved at autopsy had significantly less damage. I don't know if you can see here. Yeah, so they had significantly less damage when they came from a cadaver versus when they were revision retrieved. So what about potential solutions? I'll talk a little bit more about this in my next talk, but it's one solution that has been offered is whether ceramics are a potential way of getting around this problem. Certainly the literature does increasingly support that taper corrosion may be reduced by using a ceramic instead of a cobalt chrome head, and that it reduces the loss of cobalt chrome and material. So is taper corrosion the next epidemic? Many researchers like myself are continuing to solve the problem, but in the meantime, it appears that many surgeons are also changing their patterns and moving to ceramic heads as a way of addressing taper corrosion. And so hopefully it will not continue to be an epidemic in the future with increased utilization of ceramic heads. Thank you very much.